Thank you very much, and I'd like to apologize to the senator for uh, taking his slot. Um, I think it's quite obvious uh, that what the United States has been trying to do over the past few decades, for those of us who've lived a bit longer, is that it's been trying to contain other countries, to manage the world, to make sure that it is in charge of the globe, it and its allies. But since the United States has overextended itself and gradually other countries have uh, risen and become more powerful, the United States has become more intolerant, more angry, more aggressive, more abusive towards others. And right now, what we're seeing in Gaza, I think, is a reflection of that. The United States accuses countries across the world of violating human rights, yet we see that it's carrying out what many are now calling a Holocaust, and everyone is calling a genocide. This cannot happen without the consent of the United States. It cannot happen without the support of the Canadian government, the European Union, Australia, and their traditional allies. This simply could not happen. So when the United States goes out of its way to constantly attack China or constantly attack Russia or Iran or any other country that seems to be growing powerful, we have to look at the reality on the ground before we can take them seriously. So as long as we live in a world where the United States and its allies can massacre people in front of the international community, the genocide in Gaza is unique because it's taking place in front of our eyes. We've never had such a thing before. In the past, we would hear about it, or we would get some details later on. Now we're seeing it practically live. And not only are we seeing it live, but also the countries that are behind it are justifying it. They are giving us their own so-called logic as to why this genocide is taking place. They're blaming the dead babies on the streets that we're seeing day and night. So as long as we have this state of affairs, I think it is necessary for us to have cooperation without involvement of Western countries. That does not mean that we should isolate them or their business people or their business communities or their ordinary consumers and people on the streets. But we should not allow these Western governments, these regimes, to have influence over the way in which we do business, the way in which we do trade, the way in which we do cultural exchanges. We have to have a space where they cannot interfere. And therefore, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, I think, is very important in this regard. BRICS, of course, is extremely important in this regard. And projects such as the Belt and Road Initiative, which brings the whole of Asia closer to each other and beyond, but also the North-South corridor between Iran and Russia. These will provide opportunities for countries in the global South and the non-Western world to finally develop without Western interference, without Western governments being able to use tools such as human rights or global warming or any other of their tools in their toolbox to keep us back, to prevent us from growing and to prevent our people from becoming better off and having better lives. Again, the point is not to marginalize ordinary Westerners. People in the West are just as outraged, for example, as we are. We see unprecedented protests across Europe and even North America because of the behavior of their governments and the Israeli regime. But this space, the spaces that are now being created are promising for the future of people across the global South. They provide opportunities for our children. The United States has for 4 decades sanctioned my country, and increasingly they made it more difficult for people to live. The height of those sanctions, of course, came about with Obama and his so-called maximum pressure sanctions, what he called brutal sanctions. He wanted to brutalize he called them actually crippling sanctions. And later on, Trump called them brutal sanctions. But the objective for both Biden and Trump, for Obama and Trump, was to brutalize and to cripple ordinary Iranians. So as long as the United States and the West have a monopoly over financial institutions, over banks, over the means to trade, as long as they have some sort of veto power over how banks transact with one another, the global South is vulnerable. Our people are vulnerable. And so the more the global South integrates, such as through the Belt and Road Initiative, such as through BRICS, such as through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, and others, the more we are able to integrate independently of the West, the better it is for our citizens. Now, Iranians, as they create better ties with Central Asia, neighboring countries, and as countries are increasingly ignoring US sanctions, purchasing Iranian oil, selling goods to Iran, we see life in Iran is gradually becoming better. And I am optimistic, unless some major event occurs, that things will continue to get better for ordinary Iranians. Why? Because the United States, their ability to strangle ordinary people is gradually eroding. So I think the statements made by the previous speakers, and I'm sure the statements made by the subsequent speakers, all of them will be enlightening into strengthen and will strengthen the argument that we should ignore the narratives of the West and we should think independently. And only when we can think independently can our minds truly be colonized. And only when our minds have truly become decolonized can we think globally, and can we think in the interests of the global community. Only then can we look at the East, the West, the North, and the South with one set of values. And then I think the world that we live in will become a better place. We are living in very dark times. And I think that this darkness will continue for the foreseeable future because of Western powers. But I am optimistic in the long run that things will gradually improve and that people across the globe will have a better future once the hegemon is set aside and begins to recognize that the age of empire is over. Thank you.